Our country has long been in a very complicated system. Most of you who are young like me, we were born into this system. But that's not what can allow Burkina to thrive.
They laughed behind closed doors, in polished halls of power. From Paris to Washington, he was the butt of whispered jokes. Too young, they scoffed, too radical, too unpredictable. But deep in the heart of West Africa, in a nation choking under foreign interference and terror, one man was rewriting the rules of leadership. At just 34, Ibrahim Traore didn't come to play politics. He came to tear down the rotten pillars of neocolonial control. With fire in his voice and soldiers at his side, he rose from obscurity, not to ask for permission, but to reclaim his people's future. And while Western diplomats chuckled at what they called a military puppet show, they failed to see what was really happening. They didn't see the villages rallying behind him, the youth swearing allegiance, the continent listening. And by the time they realized it wasn't a phase, it was already too late. The ground had shifted beneath them. This is not the story of a coup. This is the awakening of a continent, led by the one man they never saw coming. Burkina Faso, land of upright people, a nation carved by resilience, yet fractured by decades of political turbulence, economic strangulation, and foreign manipulation. Once a beacon of Pan-African revolution under the fearless Thomas Sankara, the country had since been reduced to a pawn in the grand game of international power. Foreign aid flowed, but so did weapons and fear. Terrorism, once an external threat, now gnawed from within. Hundreds of villages abandoned, thousands displaced, schools closed, entire regions labeled ungovernable. Amid this chaos, power in Ouagadougou, the capital, became a revolving door. Coups came and went, but nothing truly changed. Politicians, dressed in Western suits, preached peace while signing contracts that bled their land dry. French military bases loomed like silent sentinels, their presence a constant reminder that independence was merely a word, not a reality. And then came the unexpected name, Ibrahim Traore. Unknown to many, a quiet military officer with no political pedigree, no foreign education, no elite backing, just conviction, and the fire of a generation that had had enough. When he led the coup in September 2022, many assumed he was just another ambitious soldier chasing power, another chapter in a tired story. But they were wrong. Traore was not there to negotiate with the status quo. He came to uproot it. He spoke with the bluntness of the streets and the sharpness of Sankara's ghost. He didn't just call out corruption, he named names. He didn't just criticize neocolonialism, he kicked out the symbols of it. And when the world waited for him to fold, to reach for foreign loans or beg for approval, he did the unthinkable. He turned inward, toward his people. Young, defiant, and unapologetically African, Traore began mobilizing local security forces, reshaping national narratives, and inspiring a Pan-African surge far beyond his borders. Suddenly, Burkina Faso wasn't just a troubled nation. It was becoming the front line of a new ideological war, the fight for African sovereignty in the 21st century. The West watched, then whispered, who was this man in combat fatigues, quoting Sankara and standing shoulder to shoulder with Mali and Niger? Who was this leader rejecting the old playbook and writing a new one with blood, sweat, and belief? They underestimated him once. They would not make that mistake again. Burkina Faso, a landlocked West African country whose name means land of the upright people, a name etched into memory by the revolutionary Thomas Sankara, who dared to dream of an Africa free from foreign domination. But long after Sankara was silenced, The dream flickered dimly in the shadow of global interests, grinding poverty and foreign puppeteering. The land that once stood tall, proud, and self-sufficient had become, in many ways, broken. For years, the heart of Burkina Faso beat to a rhythm dictated not by its own people, but by external powers. On paper, it had gained independence from France in 1960. In reality, French influence remained deeply entrenched, economically, militarily, psychologically. Its currency, the CFA franc, was still controlled in Paris. Its military operations were heavily coordinated with French forces. And its leaders? Many of them walked the tightrope between appeasing the West and suppressing their own people. In the north and east of the country, violent extremist groups, many born from the wreckage of NATO's intervention in Libya, swept through villages with terrifying speed. Thousands were killed. Entire regions were declared ungovernable. Armed militants laid down their own laws, while schools were burned, roads mined, and markets deserted. Fear ruled. People no longer asked when help was coming. They asked if it ever would. And in the capital, Ouagadougou, the halls of power echoed with the same tired promises. Politicians hosted conferences, issued press releases, and received foreign delegations in luxury hotels. Billions in aid were pledged. Billions were swallowed in corruption. Yet, the ground reality never changed. The people of Burkina Faso were not just angry. They were exhausted. Exhausted from watching their future be bartered away at international summits. Tired of leaders who changed faces, but not systems. Disillusioned by Western governments that offered weapons and advisors, but no lasting solutions. The very people meant to protect them had become part of the machinery that kept them oppressed. And then, out of the haze of this chaos, came a face the world had not expected. Young, barely 34, a captain in the military, not a politician, not a general, not a man of many speeches, but of carefully chosen words. Ibrahim Traore. He was not from a political dynasty. He had no ties to multinational corporations. He wasn't educated at a prestigious Western university. In fact, very few people, even within Burkina Faso, knew his name before the fateful coup of September 30th, 2022. To most observers, he seemed like just another military officer stepping into the vacuum of failed leadership. Another actor in the revolving door drama of African coups. But they missed what was brewing beneath the surface. This was not an ordinary coup. This was not a power grab for the sake of luxury or ego. This was a statement, a rupture, a rejection of the script that had held Burkina Faso hostage for generations. Traore's first moves were swift and telling. He immediately declared the previous regime's inability to secure the nation. He pledged to return the country to its people, not through hollow reforms, but through concrete, decisive action. He promised to restore territory, reopen schools, rebuild infrastructure, and remove every element of foreign dependency that kept the nation on its knees. To the West, it sounded idealistic, perhaps even dangerous. To the people of Burkina Faso, it sounded like hope. In the months that followed, Ibrahim Traore would become more than just a leader. He would become a symbol, not just for his country, but for a rising wave of African youth, disillusioned by decades of neocolonialism, corruption, and empty promises. Across the continent, young people began chanting his name alongside Sankara's. Social media buzzed with videos of him speaking truth to power, standing defiantly against Western pressure, and aligning with leaders in Mali and Niger to form a new kind of alliance, one that did not ask for approval from Paris or Washington. And as this symbol grew, so did the fear in the hearts of those who had long profited from Africa's submission. The Western world didn't know what to make of him. He was too young to control, too smart to manipulate, too bold to intimidate. And unlike other leaders before him, Traore was not chasing wealth or acceptance. He was chasing a legacy. So they mocked him. They called him inexperienced, a radical, a populist. They assumed he would falter under pressure, that he would come crawling back for loans or military support. But Traore had a different plan, and it began with waking his people up from the long, dark sleep of dependency. Burkina Faso was no longer asking to be saved. Under Ibrahim Traore, it was preparing to save itself. And what he would do next would not only shock his critics, it would send ripples across an entire continent, ready to rise. The moment Traore took power, a storm began to swirl, not just over Burkina Faso, but over Africa's political landscape. Cameras zoomed in on his youthful face. Analysts, with condescending smirks, questioned how a man so young could handle a nation at war. Western media outlets tried to box him in: military strongman, populist rebel, interim figure. Few bothered to listen to what he was actually saying. Fewer still understood that this captain wasn't improvising. He was following a philosophy, one deeply rooted in the legacy of Sankara, yet entirely forged in the fires of a new kind of struggle. From the very beginning, Traore made one thing clear. The fight wasn't just against terrorism. It was against the system that allowed it to flourish. He began by cutting through the bureaucracy that had paralyzed the nation's security apparatus. Corrupt officials were removed. Military chains of command were tightened. Soldiers, previously demoralized and poorly equipped, suddenly found themselves rearmed, remotivated, and led by someone who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with them in the trenches. This wasn't leadership from above. It was leadership from within. But it wasn't just the battlefield he focused on. Traore turned his gaze outward, toward France. For decades, French troops had operated in Burkina Faso under the guise of anti-terrorism support. But to many Burkinabe citizens, they were a symbol of something else: interference, sovereignty sacrificed for so-called stability. Traore listened to the chants in the streets. Chants not just against foreign troops, but against foreign arrogance. In a move that stunned Paris and emboldened panafricanists, Traore demanded the immediate withdrawal of French forces. Not quietly, not diplomatically, but in full public view, with the cameras rolling and the world watching. We will no longer allow our country to be a playground for foreign militaries, he declared, his voice steady, resolute. We will protect our people. We will reclaim our dignity. The message was clear. Burkina Faso would no longer outsource its survival. And yet, the West scoffed. Surely they thought this young soldier would soon return, hat in hand, asking for aid or military assistance. After all, cutting ties with France meant severing a lifeline, financial, diplomatic, and tactical. It was a risk no rational leader would take. But Traore wasn't playing the game they expected. Instead, he pivoted south and east toward Africa's own strength. He reached out to Mali and Niger, countries that had also expelled French troops and were seeking a new path. Together, they envisioned something radical, an alliance of nations that stood on African soil and answered only to African voices. Thus began the early blueprints of what would become known as the Alliance of Sahel States, a coalition built not on dependency, but on defiance, shared intelligence, joint military operations, a unified front against terrorism and foreign manipulation. Traore knew this wouldn't win him praise in Western capitals, but he wasn't looking for applause. He was looking for results. And in village after village, town after town, people began to believe again. Not because things were perfect, but because For the first time in a long time, their leader wasn't lying to them. He traveled with minimal security, spoke in local dialects, ate from the same bowls as ordinary citizens. He didn't build palaces, he built trust. And slowly, he transformed from that young captain into something more powerful than any title, the people's soldier. But the world wasn't done testing him yet. As he turned inward to rebuild his nation, the forces outside began circling. Sanctions, media blackouts, threats from international bodies. Traore was walking the knife's edge, and the next moves he made would either elevate him to icon status or destroy everything he had built. The global stage was shifting, and the West couldn't ignore it any longer. Ibrahim Traore, once dismissed as a temporary anomaly, had become the spearhead of something terrifyingly unfamiliar, an Africa that no longer asked for permission. And in the dim back rooms of diplomatic buildings from Paris to Washington, whispers began turning into strategy sessions. Something had to be done. This young captain, he was becoming a symbol, and symbols, they knew, were dangerous. Economic sanctions were the first blow. International banks froze transfers. Humanitarian aid was reassessed. Development projects screeched to a halt. The goal was clear: squeeze him until he broke. Make him run to the IMF. Make him come crawling back. But Traore didn't blink. Instead of begging, he doubled down. He called on the Burkinabe people to tighten their belts to endure the storm. Liberation, he said, is not given freely. It must be earned, and it must be defended. The words hit like thunder. Across villages and cities, instead of despair, there was a strange sense of pride swelling, because their leader wasn't selling them out. Not for comfort, not for convenience. But economic sabotage wasn't the only card on the table. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies buzzed. Misinformation began to flow like poison through international media. Stories of human rights abuses, claims of internal unrest, predictions of an imminent coup. Every headline was designed to isolate Traore, to turn his own people against him. But once again, the plan backfired. Because while international outlets painted him as a tyrant, local journalists told a different story. They showed him walking through bombed-out villages, personally comforting grieving families, lifting the spirits of frontline soldiers. They captured the truth that Traore wasn't hiding in presidential bunkers. He was out there, in the heart of the storm. And just when it seemed the pressure couldn't mount any higher, the real threat emerged. Foreign mercenaries, shifting alliances, internal betrayals. Intelligence reports suggested that agents from outside the continent were quietly stoking fires within Burkina Faso, attempting to trigger tribal divisions, armed mutinies, even political assassinations. The goal wasn't just to topple Traore, it was to shatter the very idea of an Africa, led by Africans. And yet, Traore stood firm, not just as a soldier, but as a symbol. He responded not with paranoia, but with precision. Loyalists were placed in key positions. Intelligence networks were overhauled. New surveillance technology was acquired through African and non-Western partners. But most importantly, he launched the most unexpected counterstrike of all, a national education campaign. While bullets were flying and sanctions tightening, Traore opened schools, created new history textbooks, rewrote curricula to teach Burkina Faso's youth not just how to read, but who they were. He resurrected the words of Thomas Sankara, reminded citizens of their ancient empires, their resistance movements, their stolen wealth, and the lies they'd been fed. They want you to believe you are poor, he said during one viral speech, but we are not poor, we are looted. That clip, it didn't just echo across Burkina Faso, it swept across the continent. TikToks, tweets, broadcasts, speeches. Traore's face became a digital mural of resistance. From Ghana to South Africa, Senegal to Kenya, youth movements lit up like sparks on dry tinder. This wasn't about Burkina Faso anymore. This was a continental awakening. And suddenly, the mocking tone from the West turned into cautious concern. What if he succeeded? What if this unorthodox soldier, born from the chaos of jihadist conflict, was actually building something sustainable, something contagious? The world laughed when he rose. They said he was too young, too raw, too bold. They said Burkina Faso was too poor, too unstable, too broken to lead anything, let alone itself. But those same voices, so quick to dismiss him, now speak with hesitation, or not at all. Because what Captain Ibrahim Traore sparked was not a moment. It was a movement that is still burning, hotter and higher with every passing day. He turned the mirror on Africa and said, "You are not what they called you. Not a charity case, not a battlefield, not a colony, but a civilization, a force, a future." While others waited for permission, Traore took responsibility. While leaders made excuses, he made moves. He didn't ask for applause, he asked for action. And slowly, then suddenly, the people answered. From Dakar to Nairobi, from Johannesburg to Tripoli, something began to shift. University students debated strategy, not escape plans. Farmers organized co-ops. Mothers formed defense networks. Fathers laid bricks, not just for homes, but for hope. Young soldiers saluted not foreign flags, but the soil beneath their boots. And when the world tried to isolate him, Burkina Faso didn't shrink. It grew. It grew in spirit, in dignity, in pride. Because when a people reclaim their voice, they cannot be silenced. This was never just about politics. It was about resurrection. The resurrection of a continent's courage. The memory of Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, and others reborn, not as ghosts of failure, but as guides for the present. And as the old powers scramble, trying to figure out how they lost control, a new generation already knows the answer. Because real power was never about bullets or banks. It was about belief. And now, belief is everywhere. In the schoolboy who now says he wants to be a captain like Traore, not a footballer. In the refugee who returns home because for the first time, the soil feels safe. In the artist who paints murals not of presidents, but of people. In you, for watching this story unfold and realizing it's more than a headline. It's a signal. A signal that something powerful is happening. A signal that Africa is not rising. It has risen. And if this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone who still believes in change. Let them see what happens when courage meets conviction. Like this video, not for the algorithm, but for the ancestors who never lived to see this dawn, and the children who now can. Comment below. What part of this story lit the fire in you? What does real leadership look like in your eyes? Let's build a community of voices that refuse silence. And above all, subscribe. Because we don't just cover news here. We trace the heartbeat of a new era. We tell the stories they don't want you to hear. And we stand with those who dare to lead, not just follow. This isn't just a channel. It's a front row seat to history in the making. Traore isn't the end of the story. He's the beginning of 1,000 others. He is proof that you don't have to be born into power to wield it. You don't have to wait for permission to lead. You don't have to be liked to be legendary. All you need is belief. So take this story, carry it with you, and when someone tells you it can't be done, tell them about the young captain from Burkina Faso who rewrote the rules. Tell them his name was Traore, and he didn't just rise. He rose so others could soar.